Hi, this is George Alger with the Two Green Energy Video Report, and today I'm speaking with Craig Shields, the author of Renewable Energy, Facts and Fantasies. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks very much, George. Good to be here.
So, Craig, today we're speaking about the business of renewable energy.
Right.
And one of the things that I understand is there's a good amount of corruption and even ignorance regarding this industry. Can you speak to that?
Well, the way I look at this is nobody doubts that we will eventually get to where we need to be with respect to the migration to renewables. In 100 years, people won't be driving Hummers, we won't be burning coal, we won't be poisoning the Earth's skies and oceans. So, having said that, we're not making much progress as we speak. In the United States, we have less than 2% penetration of renewables. Almost 50%, 48, 49% of our energy, of our electricity comes from coal, a practice that is incredibly and obviously unsustainable. But you've got 30 states, that's 60 senators, who mine coal. The senators don't, but the states do. And trust me, that influences the way in which the Congress makes up its mind with respect to energy policy. So in my estimation, you've got that level of corruption and ignorance. In other words, you've got people voting what they think is the best for themselves financially, even though we're in the process. We spend $250 billion a year fixing lung damage that's caused by coal. So once we understand, once we kind of get through this issue of the ignorance of how truly expensive all this stuff is, I think things will change a bit.
All right. So the question isn't really if we're going to move in this direction, it's merely a matter of when.
Right. Well, the way I look at this is that, yes, in 100 years we will have made if we still have a planet here, if the oceans aren't rising around us, etc., if we're not dropping dead like flies from lung disease, cancer in specific, we have skyrocketing rates of childhood cancer attributable to something. So, but I do believe that if we do have a planet here, we will have made this transition. So that's not the question. The question really is who's going to make a buck in the process. And that's why I want to do this. I want to discuss the financial aspects of this thing, because that's the only driving motivation. The way in which big business and big government function is associated with making money. So recognizing that, we might as well just say, look, let's just pretend that there's fairness, that there's decency, that there's integrity in these areas, which generally there isn't, but let's pretend there is. And let's just figure out, okay, well, what do we need to do as a business in order to make this financially attractive?
All right. And what do we need to do as a business? Or what can we say in terms of suggestions or advice to folks who are trying to turn good ideas or renewable energy ideas or sustainable ideas into business?
Well, there are a couple of issues that I'd like to bring up. I'm in the process of working on my next book, and I still don't have a centralizing theme to this, though I'm very interested, and I think a lot of the people who have given me advice have suggested that I kind of do a deeper dive, as it were, into the economics associated with this. So to that end, I drove up north a couple weeks ago to visit the managing partner, Ray Lane, of Kleiner Perkins, one of the most visible VC firms on the planet. So the people behind Amazon and Google, just to name a couple. So, and it was fascinating to understand what they looked for. And maybe I could talk a little bit about that?
Let's do that. But actually, even to undercut that, when we're talking in terms of venture capital, I mean, do you consider that is a prerequisite to making renewable energy businesses financially workable, or just bootstrapping a business?
Well, certainly, I think everybody agrees that from the entrepreneurial side, that if you can do this without venture capital, you're well advised to try to go that route. So if you can use your own money, angel money, etc., you borrow stuff, SBA loans, do whatever you can, as opposed to bring venture capital in, you're well advised to do that. You could argue this both ways. Obviously, venture capital looks at this as from the standpoint of not only giving you the couple $1 million you need to take this to the next level, but also bringing on board strategic advice. And they're very, I mean, the Kleiner Perkins of the world actually do add a great deal of value in terms of keeping things well directed. Having said that, right, a good business plan, amassing the capital, depending on the nature of the business, obviously, can be, and in a lot of cases should be done without venture capital.
Okay, good. So now let's speak about your meeting with Kleiner Perkins.
Okay. Well, here are people who want to hit home runs. They're not about internal rate of return on their investment. They go to their investors and they say, look, you sign up for 10 years. Don't expect that I'm going to be able to turn a profit of any of these things, and maybe they've got 40 deals in one fund. None of these things should be looked at as short term. You need to expect a payback out of this in about 10 years. Having said that, so these are deals that are calculated to hit home runs, recognizing that most of them won't. If they hit 1 or 2 out of 40, and maybe 5 of the remainder that do fairly well, the rest of them don't matter at all, essentially. So these are deals that are calculated to be disruptive technologies, which, if successful, are going to be fantastically profitable. That's certainly number one. Ray told me, as an example, that there are 900. His is one of 900 VC firms. He said there should be 300. They're 900. Because they multiplied like mushrooms in the 90s when people were making money over a very short period of time, pre-internet bust in the early, in about 2001. But certainly this issue of going after disruptive technology is at the core of the Kleiner Perkins philosophy. The other thing is that they like to remove the technologic risk early. They don't mind having $50 million in a deal, but not if there's some risk that this technology won't scale. So, for instance, if you are, they do the Fisker Karma, the plug-in hybrid. Okay, so they have raised, they did the initial capitalization of that, getting it to the point where now they're building factories. They bought a defunct GM factory in, I think, Wilmington, Delaware. But they wanted to make sure, to make this point, they wanted to make sure that there's no technology risk, that, for instance, plug-in hybrids don't have some fatal flaw technologically.
Okay.
Okay. You want me to continue?
Yes, but before, I'm trying to translate this or think of this in terms of an entrepreneur or an inventor, someone who's got an idea, and they've determined that, well, they just don't have the personal resources to bootstrap it. So they are interested in getting venture capital. So, how does this information translate into a person who's looking for funding?
Well, certainly developing a business plan that meets the obvious and openly stated criteria of a company like Kleiner Perkins is important. So, for instance, the next thing is they would much rather invest in a B idea with an A team than an A idea with a B team. So, in other words, this needs to be a team of seasoned, proven executives who've done this before. So the business plan, when I help people write business plans, I recognize exactly how this is going to be reviewed, and I write it accordingly. So, in other words, I don't want to make this look like a one-man show in somebody who's an unproven player in a certain a guy with an idea. That doesn't work.
Okay, but if we take this concept of a guy with an idea, and in fact someone who believes they have a fantastic idea, I mean, there's only so much you can write about it that's going to position it differently. So would you say that such a business person or inventor or entrepreneur needs to get more people on board before they can even contemplate going for venture capital?
I wouldn't say they have to, but I would say that they should.
Okay.
I have a great business plan that I'm representing right now that is essentially a guy with an idea and a set of relationships and supply chain logistics that he's really worked out very carefully. But when I look at this, I say, this is something that just looks thin. Why, let's not let's take the most obvious steps to make this thing look robust and credible to the people who are going to be trusting you with a few $1 million. It doesn't, I mean, I wouldn't think that it requires that much. I mean, I know that inventors and entrepreneurs think that their idea is worth $1 million, you know, $500 million. They're notorious for overestimating the value of what they have. Having said that, I try to talk people into just look at it from the other guy's perspective. In other words, what is this thing worth to him? So, exactly. So crafting a business plan accordingly.
Okay. All right. So then, what else would you say was some key points that you took away from your Kleiner Perkins meeting?
Well, first of all, in no other sphere than the internet can you take an extremely modest investment and parlay it over a period of just a few months into a huge business. So most of these things, and certainly the things that we're talking about when we contemplate renewable energy, so they're physical, they're power, they're not, in other words, it's not software, it's not some app that somebody's going to put on their iPad or whatever. It's not something that can be developed like an Amazon was developed with very, very little money. So most of these things are not like that. They do require scale. They do require looking at a technology and an investment in it that is going to require, in a lot of cases, a couple $1 million to do a prototype and scaling to hundreds of millions of dollars to build things. Fisker is a great example of this thing. And by the way, this is one of their criteria. They're not going to be into this thing for $500 million. They may be into it for 50 million, but they don't want to be in at 50 million and realize that there's no money around to scale this thing. So, for instance, we're trying to replace 230 million cars on the road, and obviously Fisker's not going to do all of them. But in other words, we need to contemplate a production machine that is hundreds of millions of dollars in investment capital, and that needs to come from somewhere else. So is it going to come from, and that's the essence of what happened in this recession, is that all this money dried up. All the banks weren't loaning, government wasn't guaranteeing loans, et cetera. So there was $2 trillion, still is $2 trillion of private money sitting on the sidelines. So that's what makes the definition of a recession is money that's not moving. So the other criterion is that these people need to be able to look at this and say, oh, well, the money is going to be there when it's needed. Okay.
All right, so how about getting a team? So if you've got a business guy or an entrepreneur or inventor, he's envisioned a market where he can really scale up, he can do well, but he wants to appeal to a venture capitalist. So how would you even suggest someone get the kind of team that's going to look good, not only on paper, but actually do what's needed in the real world to get the result that everyone would want?
Well, there are a couple of answers to that. One is that, and I'm sure you've run across this, that the guy who becomes the CEO of a $5 million company isn't necessarily the guy who's going to take that to 50 million to 500 million. They're different types of skill sets and backgrounds. So having said that, the venture capital world understands that as well. So the fact that, having said that, they don't want a loose cannon inventor who has no charisma, who can't talk to Wall Street, who can't defend himself, who can't articulate the business concept, who has never led a team of people, etc. There are obvious things that they don't want in terms of even funding little businesses. But nobody is expecting the guy with a great idea to become the CEO of General Electric. So that's not a problem. What is a problem is, as I say, teams that are extremely uneven and lumpy and just have huge holes in them. So I would say, for instance, the guy I've been talking about here has no financial background. He's not a CFO. Does he need one? Yes. This is essentially, he's a sales guy. And he's an incredible sales guy. So he doesn't need a huge, a real successful VP sales, because that's from a general management perspective, that's really who the guy is. But there are other things in terms of supply chain logistics and operations and, as I say, finance, that would look very good in terms of giving this business plan, giving this business the depth that it obviously needs when it's observed from the outside.
All right, good. So we're going to have to close this segment off right now, but if you could just summate what you consider the most important points in, let's say 10 or 20 seconds, what would they be?
Well, I would just say that the construction of a business plan needs to be done from the standpoint of the people observing it. So it's like anything else. It's like playing the piano. In other words, the idea when I play the piano for people is not trying to show them what a good pianist I am, but try to communicate the beauty that the composer intended in this thing. I'm concerned about them. I'm not introverted about myself. So, and I think I hope there's a parallel here to what I've said about business plans.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you, Craig. This would be Craig Shields, author of Renewable Energy Facts and Fantasies. Until we see you again.
Thanks very much, George.